Is John Deedy, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County and local media political analyst. Welcome to the Maryland State Politics and Government podcast on Substack. Today, I'm talking with Jared DeMarinis from the State Board of Elections for the state of Maryland. Busy time. Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you, John. It's very busy, and it's only going to get busier.
Oh, yes, especially in election year, it gets a little more chaotic with everything. My
Yes.
first question is, how did you get interested in elections and voting?
I guess it started when I was just, my family was always involved in politics. We always had the discussions around the table. Uh, Presidential elections were always a major topic. And, so it always piqued my interest. And from there, I volunteered on campaigns early on in my life, in college, then post college, worked on a campaign, ended up, working for candidates and always had a love for elections and voting, and basically ended up in Maryland and working for the State Board of Elections and then becoming the state administrator. So it's been quite a fascinating journey, but it always started with the love for campaigns and politics and elections.
1980s, I worked on a lot of campaigns, and I got burned out at 30 because I always felt it was a young man's game. And it was like I said, it pays well when you're really good and rise up, but do you want to go through that type of life? Because after I worked on a campaign, they found me a government job, basically to put me on the back burner to the next election came up. And I said, do I want to live a life like that? I said, nah, maybe not. But I always encourage people to get involved because I think it's so important.
I think so too. I think that when I was doing my first campaigns, especially when you're young, you're right about a young man's profession there. You don't have that many responsibilities. Go enjoy it, become a part of it, get active, and, participate in our democracy. And I think that you build friendships, relationships, you understand the system. I always encourage everyone when I speak to like high school students, go do a campaign. It's great.
One of the things that comes up all the time that just won't go away, especially with President Trump, is the myths or some people's reality of voter fraud. And how would you like to address that? I'd kind of like to give you the floor on that because so many people have misconceptions or their own perceptions of I know it's fraud because my guy didn't win.
Right. I think that's not fraud, right? Just because your guy didn't win or your person didn't win doesn't make it the election was fraudulent. Fraud, we have laws in place to prevent fraud. And when it does happen, which is infrequently and rare, the state prosecutor is there to prosecute those crimes. And, our historically, you can go back forever. Our elections have never been perfect. Elections are not perfect, but we make them better every time, and we build off of that, and so that people are right now you can feel safe and secure about the election results and how the process works, and that everyone who's eligible has the right to vote in this and participate in our democracy. So I mean, it is it's basically always trying to prove a negative that it's like a that doesn't really exist. It's there's mythical fraud. There's always fraud. But when you ask for concrete examples of it, because I'll be happy to look at it and say, if you have the concrete example, give it to me, and I'll work with the state prosecutor or law enforcement about it, and to see, because I don't want to have fraud. You never get the concrete examples. You always get, oh, I heard about this, or I saw this, or I read about it on a social media post there, and you're like, well, give me that so I can kind of start looking at it and see if there's any truth to it. And that's where the conversations usually end.
One thing I'll ask about quickly is I remember a couple months ago when there was that situation regarding that former superintendent principal in the Baltimore area who was in Iowa. And someone found out, I guess people had their time on their hands, that he was a registered voter in Maryland, even though he was not a citizen. I mean, how does that happen? How does that happen? How do you have that happen a lot?
So I don't want to, because that case is still working its way through the courts there. Uh, but at one point here, Maryland, we're an automatic voter registration state. And so people that go to motor vehicles will, unless they opt out, will all be automatically registered to vote. The same goes for the health benefits exchange. These are, Maryland knows that we made these things. We tried to remove as many barriers to voter registration as possible. And this is, taking motor voter from the 90s and, making sure that it's just kind of moving it forward into the modern ages here. Along the lines there, the General Assembly knew that there may be individuals who get caught into this dragnet here or don't understand the questions, might make a mistake in our attempt to, basically register as many eligible people as possible. And so there is provisions in the law that says that if you are accidentally registered through an AVR agency, that you're not going to be held criminally liable for that activity. And to not and then then there's processes to cancel that registration because it wasn't it's not supposed to be valid. So there was a policy determination that was made here about trying to get as many people registered as possible that are eligible, and making sure that it's still that people that get caught in this by mistake are not necessarily prosecuted for that administrative, I would say, pull.
One question I have, and it's kind of an odd question. People register the vote, but people also move out of state. I have
Yeah.
relatives that recently moved to Florida within the last year, and of course, people often die. How does the Board of Elections, your offices, kind of the best way to describe it, remove those people? Because it's not like a dead person could call you up and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm not going to be voting anymore."
Right.
And people who move out of state don't say, I ought to call my former state and get that taken care of. How does your department deal with that? How does the Board of
So,
Elections do
so
this?
one, we're a part of ERIC, which is a conglomeration of states right now that share information with each other on individuals that that may be present in other states. And so we match up against their voter rolls to see if Jared DeMarinis is moved to, say, another state in our in our group. If that's the case, then we look at it and we go, oh, what's the most recent of the registrations? That's where that person lives versus the older registration there. And then we also use it through the national change of address. We get that data. That's also a part of ERIC's processes in there. For death records, we work with the Maryland Health Department there to get death records. A part of making sure that we're up to date on that. Additionally, one of the eligibilities too is that if you've been convicted of a felony and incarcerated, you can't be active on our voter rolls as well. So we get records from the courts to see who was recently convicted of felonies and imprisoned. So we do list maintenance is a daily activity, and we avail ourselves to almost every resource out there to make sure that we're a part of it. As also with death as well, we sent out brochures to funeral homes to help with us on that aspect as well because they have sometimes a little bit more recent information about death, and to help us make sure that our roles are as accurate and as up to date as possible.
Thank you for the PhD in this because I've always been curious about this because it sounds like some states, like Maryland, on the ball. And there's other states when you hear all these people who are dead are registered to vote, they may not be in these types of systems or are aggressive. I know a lot of states, their definition of aggressiveness is if you don't vote, we're just going to remove you from the rolls.
So I think election administration is basically uh, you there's been an evolution in election administration, and you see it from from the past where it was much more of a passive type of activity. The just even the idea of voter registration rolls, its administration portion of it. Some also are buried in secretaries of state's offices, with limited resources. You saw a lot with the counties, or municipalities. They have to run it as well with clerks and everything. So you saw a major shift in like 2000 with Hava, well, with the Bush v. Gore case, and then 2002 when with Congress implementing Hava and trying to start centralizing voter registration information, equipment, moving that forward. And then the next one was you saw a lot more in 2020, 2016 and in 2020, which has kind of shifted all the dynamics of election administration. But in the past, it has been a little bit more passive. Now it's in the forefront, and everyone is now looking at and trying to be as proactive and as innovative as possible to make sure that their lists are as accurate and complete. And that's why Eric exists and other type of organizations are trying to work and fill those voids.
My next question, and I'll try not to make it sound complicated, you may even know more about it than I do, is what are your thoughts about legislation before Congress known as the SAVE Act, which is designed that basically getting rid of mail-in ballots, designed it to uh, make sure that people provide proof of that they're alive, that they got voter ID, all this stuff. What are your thoughts about that legislation? Would it be a good idea, bad idea? How would it impact Maryland if it passed?
So I think overall, like we shouldn't be trying to erect barriers to voting. I think when you erect barriers to voting, that can lead to disenfranchisement. Uh, you know, and as laws get passed here, there would be an impact on Marylanders at the federal level here. But as an administrator here, we try not to, I would say, weigh in on the policy determinations of it. If the Congress wants to pass that law, then we would, of course, implement it because it would be a federal law at that point.
Can elections be improved?
How can elections be improved? I would say with the battle of dis and misinformation, because I think there has to be more of a trust factor now that was in the past that doesn't exist now and stuff.
No
But
problem.
elections, I think, again, it gets down to the fact that with mis and disinformation here, I think the trust in elections has been eroded, and to improve that, election officials like myself have to be much more proactive in getting back that trust. It's easy to destroy trust. It's hard to rebuild that trust. And one of the things now to improve elections is to improve the confidence in elections through being more active and being bigger in the social in voter outreach participation.
Constitution and laws make it pretty clear that elections are to be run by the states. And you get 50 states doing things sometimes 48 different ways. And recently, President Trump talked about nationalizing elections, and people had an interpretation behind that. Should the federal government play more of a role in elections? What type of role should they maybe play, or should it basically be a little bit more of MYOB, and basically the states really have this under control?
I think that the states have this under control. I think that the Constitution is clear on the roles. Congress has some authority over federal elections there. They can pass laws. But I think that the founding fathers made it so that the states have the ability, because elections are a very localized uh, uh, activity, and making sure that each state has control over its apparatus. and that was the structure of that we have in place, and it has worked for a long period of time here, not 100, 250 years, because the Constitution wasn't in place until 1787, but it's getting up there very soon.
One of the big issues going on in the state of Maryland is the issue of redistricting. And I touch on that because one of the issues they've had recently regarding doing these maps, et cetera, is people have pointed out next Tuesday is the filing deadline. And there was a proposal by the Speaker of the House to move the filing deadline from basically next Tuesday to the 20th of March. I'm not going to ask you to get involved in the politics of it. If you want to, fine, but I'm not going to ask you to get involved in the politics of that in general. Do you feel that if they were to, do you feel that if they were to do this redistricting, if there was pressure to do it, do you think they would have to kind of change the deadline? Because my thought is if a person's committed to running, let's say in District 1, and all of a sudden the district gets redrawn and maybe they live in another district, which you can, maybe
Yes.
that alters everything. And the person who was thinking of District 1, but now it's changed, where maybe another district would be more suitable to them. Do you think that if they were to pass something, you might have to have best, not much a redo, but give people a chance to kind of refile any paperwork because of these types of situations?
Well, I think that whatever the General Assembly wants to do for redistricting, again, we will implement it to the best of our abilities and as quickly as we can to make sure that the election moves forward in a timely manner here. So, yes, right now, the filing deadline, the candidate filing deadline is, February 24th. So that's 1 week away. And so I would say that, you know, as of now, that's still our deadline here. If laws get changed, they would open it up. We would adjust our calendar accordingly. But until then, we're going to move forward with the election as scheduled. But if the General Assembly changes it, then we will adapt and implement their changes because that's what we do.
A question a little bit more touching on this, but to make it kind of short to the point. If they had to, let's say the filing deadline gets changed in March and you guys adapt to do a great job on it, do you think they would also have to change the date of the June primary? Because if all of a sudden these districts are getting changed, it kind of alters what you might want to do as a candidate. And do you think that that would have to be moved a little bit?
I would say that those are questions for the General Assembly to see if they want to, because those are policy determinations on whether or not, on how it affects the candidates. My mission is to make sure that Marylanders get to vote and have clear instructions on who, what, when, and how to vote. Uh, so, those were policy determinations as to the impact of redistricting and its effect on candidates. We would just implement it if they want to keep it the same election period. We'll work on the June 23rd deadline. If it has to be moved, it would, we'll adjust accordingly and inform voters accordingly as well.
Last question I'm going to ask is related to the thing that political analysts like me like, and even some people who watch a lot of TV like. When election night comes up and it's 8 o'clock, people want all the returns by 8:01.
Yeah.
And I know
Right.
that's a lot of pressure, but is there a way that things could be accelerate a little more? What kind of causes the slowdown? Because sometimes you'll hear this district hasn't reported yet, and people are wondering what's going on. What causes some of those slowdowns, and what can be done to kind of speed things up a little bit?
Well, first, the things that we're going to speed up with is mail-in voting, because I think before like that 801 and the expectations for the public has always been election night. I want to know results, and in the past, before COVID in 2020, mail-in voting was only about 5 to 6% of the turnout. And so, you could determine outcomes because of margins and percentages that are remaining outstanding of ballots, right? Post COVID, mail-in voting has been increasingly popular in the state of Maryland. In the past election in 24, in the primary, it was almost 40% of the turnout, and in the general, it was almost a third right there. It was a third voted, a little bit over a third voted in person on election day, about a third voted early, and the remainder voted by mail. So it is a very popular thing there. And as people vote, if they wait until the last week or so, the canvas doesn't happen until afterwards, and then the difference is of the votes that were counted, there's a wider margin because of outstanding ballots there. So that kind of helps. That would be a part of the delay. Uh, the other parts too is, with polling places, we have over 26,000 election judges working. Sometimes they take their time, they work, they've been there all day. They take a little bit of time getting it back into the centralized facilities, the boards of elections for processing and making sure the returns are coming in. So, there is a little bit of a delay there, but we always look to improve. We're always looking to making sure that, election judges understand the expectation, and, I understand the stakeholders' expectations of trying to get election results as quickly as possible. But so back to the mail-in, we started counting prior to election day. We don't release the totals until election day. We also start processing early voting canvassing earlier on election day as well, so that on 801, a substantial tranche of votes are going to be released immediately. So, you're going to get to start to see things almost instantaneous after the polls close.
Fantastic to hear. Thank you again for your time and the education you gave me and my listeners as far as what goes on with voting. Good luck this election season.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. I need it.